Welcome to the deep dive. We're cracking open a really powerful piece of literature today, and we're using a specific source document. It's a fascinating transcript excerpt, actually, to guide us through a pivotal moment and, well, uncover some pretty profound insights. Our focus for this deep dive is Fyodor Dostoevsky's epic novel, The Brothers Karamazov. Now, we're not trying to tackle the whole masterpiece in one go, obviously. Instead, with the help of our source material, we're sort of zeroing in on one specific section. We'll follow one brother, Alexei, through a really critical few hours and then encounter another, the very enigmatic Smerdyakov, in a way that brings his complex character into much sharper focus.
That's exactly right. In this particular passage, it's absolutely essential in the novel. It's not just, connecting tissue. It's really where key motivations get laid bare. Family dynamics are revealed in stark detail, and the stage is set for events that will, frankly, define the rest of the story. Our source material, this transcript we're using, it offers this meticulous breakdown of the dialogue, the internal struggles presented right here. It gives us a unique lens, really, to understand these characters and the simmering tensions that are just about to boil over.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive is pretty clear. Pull out the core insights, the character revelations, the psychological weight, the underlying conflicts woven into this specific section. And we're using the detailed analysis provided in our source as our map, essentially. Consider this our guide into a moment of intense personal and familial drama. Let's dive right in. Okay, let's unpack this right from the start then. The source material takes us right into Alexei's state of mind immediately after he leaves Katerina Ivanovna. Now, he's just come from a very intense, emotionally charged situation with her, and now he's alone processing what's actually going on inside his head at this precise moment. What are the conflicting pulls he's feeling?
Well, as our source clearly lays out, the core of Alexei's immediate struggle is this profound internal conflict. It's a clash between two really powerful forces, both vying for his attention, his energy. On one hand, you've got this urgent, almost overwhelming pull back to the monastery. His spiritual mentor, Father Zosima, is gravely ill, nearing death. And Alexei has this deep fear that Zosima might pass away before he can get back, before he can be by his side. There's that strong sense of spiritual duty, needing to be present for this sacred transition with the man who's guided his whole path.
That spiritual urgency, yeah, you can really feel it. That need to be near the elder in his final moments. But the source immediately points out there's this competing earthly tension pulling him just as strongly, maybe even, well, maybe even more so at this moment.
Exactly. Simultaneously, he's absolutely gripped by this deep, unsettling anxiety about his father, Fyodor Pavlovich, and his brothers, particularly Dmitri and Ivan. He has this strong, almost premonitory inner feeling, an intuition that something terrible, something genuinely disastrous isn't just possible, but maybe even imminent within his family. It's a kind of gut feeling he can't just reason away like a dark cloud hanging over him.
And this isn't just some random fear bubbling up, is it? The source reminds us that Father Zosima, with his almost, well, prophetic insight into people's souls and futures, had specifically hinted at this. He'd given Alexei direct instructions that are now weighing really heavily on him.
Yes, the source definitely underscores this critical point. Father Zosima had, just before this moment, emphasized to Alexei that his true path, his most important duty right now, wasn't solely within the contemplative life of the monastery. Critically, it lay with his family. He specifically instructed Alexei to go out into the world to watch over his brothers and his father. He implied that the brewing conflict at home was reaching a kind of crisis point that needed Alexei's presence, his particular spiritual perspective. And Zosima framed it in the most profound way, really. He stated that by serving this difficult, messy duty within his own family, trying to bring some measure of peace or, resolution to their turmoil, Alexei would, in a very real and significant way, be serving Father Zosima himself, his own spiritual legacy. There's a powerful redirection, moving Alexei's focus from purely monastic, internal concerns to the chaotic, demanding world of human relationships and family duty.
So Alexei is caught in this agonizing dilemma. He's torn between the urgent spiritual duty to be with his dying, beloved elder and this powerful, intuitive sense of impending family catastrophe, a feeling reinforced, validated even, by Zosima's own final instructions. Does he follow the spiritual pull back to the monastery, or does he heed the call to try and intervene in the earthly familial chaos?
Precisely. And the source captures his confusion, his internal wrestling, perfectly. He's agonizing, trying to decide, should he follow this strong intuition, meet his brothers first, specifically Dmitri, who he thinks is the most immediate danger, trying to prevent this looming big trouble? Or should he put aside that earthly concern and just rush back to the monastery before Father Zosima passes away? It's a genuine moment of intense indecision, weighing two incredibly heavy, seemingly contradictory obligations.
But a decision is ultimately made. How does he actually resolve this conflict in his mind, according to the source?
Yeah.
Which path does he choose to take in this moment of crisis?
Well, the source tells us that after this internal struggle, Alexei remembers Father Zosima's words with, renewed clarity and force. The elder's instruction that his duty lay with his family right now, it just resonates deeply within him. He feels the truth, the correctness of his spiritual father's guidance. And based on that powerful realization, he decides against going directly back to the monastery. He makes the difficult, perhaps counterintuitive choice for a monk. He chooses to prioritize the immediate earthly matter of his brothers and father. He follows that strong intuition and Zosima's specific final guidance. He chooses to step towards the family crisis, not away from it into the, relative peace of the monastery.
Okay, so Alexei makes this deeply significant choice, choosing to confront the potential family crisis rather than returning to the monastery. He's acting on Zosima's guidance, his own intuition. Who does he decide he needs to find first in this urgent attempt to prevent disaster?
He specifically sets out to find and meet Dmitri first. And this wasn't an arbitrary decision at all. The source makes it quite clear why. Alexei feels that Dmitri poses the greatest and most immediate threat to everyone involved in this brewing conflict, including their father.
And what is it about Dmitri specifically that makes Alexei believe he's the one who must be confronted first? What's the basis for this fear? Is it just a feeling, or...?
No, it's rooted directly in Dmitri's volatile and, frankly, often violent past behavior. The source explicitly references earlier events in the story, where Dmitri's aggressive, uncontrollable nature was terrifyingly evident. We're reminded of instances where Dmitri, violently entered the family home, causing chaotic scenes, engaging in physical fights. Alexei's fear is really a rational response to this knowledge. He genuinely fears Dmitri's capacity for causing significant trouble, maybe even physical harm, due to his demonstrated aggressive nature, his impulsiveness, his lack of self-control when he's provoked or feels desperate. His reasoning, as the source presents it, is simple and direct. The most violent, aggressive person, the one most likely to do something wrong, will be Dmitri. Therefore, he feels this urgent need to talk to Dmitri, trying to de-escalate the situation with him before anyone else.
Okay, so with Dmitri as his target, where does Alexei actually go in his search? The source doesn't send him to Dmitri's usual lodgings, does it? It's somewhere else.
No, that's right. The source describes him going to a house on a particular street where Dmitri had a habit of staying or visiting frequently in the past. It's not his primary residence, but it's a known haunt, you could say, a place associated with Dmitri's less conventional activities.
And what kind of a place is this house described as being? Is it somewhere you'd expect to find someone easily? Sounds a bit off the beaten path.
The source paints a very vivid and rather desolate picture of this location. It's described as a large house, with a significant garden area, both front and back. However, its condition is explicitly stated as poor. There are thickets, overgrown grass, giving it this wild, unkempt, almost abandoned look. And crucially, it's locked up. There's a lock on the outer gate preventing easy public access, and also a lock on the inside of the house itself. It strongly suggests it's either uninhabited or maybe specifically meant to be kept locked and private. It sounds like an older property that's kind of fallen into disrepair and is being used perhaps intermittently or maybe secretly.
And Alexei, finding the gate locked, doesn't just wait around or leave. He actually gets in by crossing the boundary, jumping over, as the source puts it. Quite determined.
Yes, he shows this surprising determination. Doesn't wait for someone to maybe open the gate, doesn't try to find another way in. He takes direct action, overcomes the physical barrier by just jumping over the boundary into the grounds, and once inside this quiet, overgrown space, he finds a bench and sits there, starting his wait.
Waiting alone in this quiet, slightly eerie, locked-up place. The source gives us more than just his actions, though. It really delves into his inner state while he's waiting there. What's going on with him emotionally, psychologically, as he sits there?
The source really emphasizes Alexei's inner state during this solitary, tense wait. It's a very revealing detail, even though he's a monk, right? Someone trained in spiritual discipline usually finds solace and purpose in religious devotion, quiet contemplation. He finds it profoundly difficult to simply sit alone in this moment. He's not finding peace or comfort. He's depicted as being stressed, anxious, restless. He's genuinely tense about the potential confrontation with Dmitri, about the uncertainty of what might happen, and maybe even wondering if he made the right choice coming here instead of going back to the monastery. It's a crucial detail that sort of strips away the monastic ideal for a moment and shows his very human side, his vulnerability, his anxiety, his inability to find internal peace when faced with overwhelming earthly conflict, and the weight of his intuition and duty. So as Alexei sits there on the bench, grappling with his anxiety in this quiet, overgrown garden, the source tells us that after about 10 to 15 minutes of this tense waiting, his solitude is broken. He suddenly hears voices.
Voices. In this seemingly deserted, locked-up place. That must have been quite startling after being alone with his thoughts.
Absolutely. It immediately shifts the mood, breaks the silence. He's surprised, wondering who could possibly be in this desolate house and grounds that he probably thought was empty. He quickly figures out the voices are coming from the back of the garden, near some particularly thick, tangled patches of overgrown vegetation. He looks over there and sees a man and a woman sitting, partially hidden by the foliage.
And who does he discover these hidden figures to be? Not Dmitri, I assume.
No, not Dmitri. The source reveals that the man, quite unexpectedly, is Smerdyakov.
Smerdyakov, the often overlooked and perhaps the most enigmatic of the Karamazov brothers, the fourth brother, the half-brother.
Yes, precisely. The source confirms his identity and his parentage, which is absolutely central to his character and his position in the family. He is the illegitimate son of Lizaveta Smerdyashchaya and, significantly, of the same father as Alexei, Ivan, and Dmitry Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov. This makes him their half-brother, sharing the Karamazov bloodline through their father, but having this starkly different background because of his mother's circumstances and his upbringing by the servant Grigory and his wife.
Right, and the woman sitting there with Smerdyakov in the garden.
Her name is Maria Kondratyevna. The source describes her physically as being attractive and pretty. She also has a direct practical connection to this specific location. The source identifies her mother as being the landlady of this very house where Smerdyakov and Maria are sitting in the neglected garden.
So Alexei, coming to this house specifically to find Dmitri, has instead stumbled upon this unexpected private encounter between his half-brother Smerdyakov and Maria, the landlady's daughter, hidden away in the overgrown garden. That's quite a significant and potentially revealing chance encounter.
And what immediately captures your attention here is the nature of their interaction when Alexei first observes them, even before he makes his presence known. The source tells us Smerdyakov is engaged in a scene that seems, well, on the surface, quite romantic. He's playing the guitar and reciting a poem he has composed, specifically for Maria.
A serenade in an overgrown garden. It sounds almost like a classic courtship scene, doesn't it?
That's the initial impression, yeah. The poem he recites, which is quoted in the source, it speaks of this powerful, almost fated connection between them. An irresistible force in the world, something they cannot resist, that draws him and Maria together. It's essentially a declaration of his feelings for her, framed in that sort of elevated, emotional language of poetry, accompanied by music.
How does Maria respond to this romantic overture and display of, well, artistic talent?
According to the source, she's quite impressed, very complimentary. She tells Smerdyakov that he's very talented, praising his skill both at playing the guitar and his ability to compose and recite poetry. She also tells him she finds him very intelligent. She seems genuinely affected by his artistic and intellectual side, and maybe seeing something in him that others overlook.
And this is where it gets really interesting and shows us a crucial layer of Smerdyakov's character. The source notes that immediately after receiving Maria's warm compliment, his mood undergoes this sudden, dramatic, almost jarring shift.
It changes completely. Instead of, accepting the praise or continuing the romantic tone, he abruptly becomes deeply cynical. The source specifically describes him in this moment as someone who sees everything negatively, characterizing this attitude as the defining trait of a cynic. And he immediately turns this cynicism on the very thing Maria just praised his own talent.
He dismisses the very poetry and music he was just using to express his feelings for her. That seems contradictory.
Absolutely. He calls his creative expression, the poem and the guitar playing, a useless thing, nonsense, and a frivolous thing. He challenges Maria's admiration by asking rhetorically, and with a definite touch of scorn, do people actually talk to each other in real life using poetry, through verses? He points out, factually, that they don't, and therefore, he concludes, this artistic expression is worthless, lacking any practical value. It's a truly striking moment where he harshly criticizes and devalues his own artistic creation, seemingly just moments after it successfully garnered him affection and admiration. It immediately reveals a deep self-contempt, perhaps, or a profound mistrust of genuine connection and beauty.
Maria is understandably surprised, maybe even confused or hurt by this sudden wave of negativity, isn't she? The source says she pushes back a little, telling him he shouldn't be so negative about himself.
Yes, she urges him not to be so critical. And this gentle pushback from Maria seems to be what prompts Smerdyakov to try and explain why he is this way, to delve into the underlying reasons for his pervasive cynicism, his negativity, his self-contempt. He asks Maria, what does she truly know about him, beyond this surface impression of intelligence and talent? She only knows these positive things.
But Smerdyakov clearly sees his own life and himself through a fundamentally different, much darker and more painful lens.
He does. And this is where we get a crucial, albeit quite bleak, insight into the sources of his deep-seated pain and resentment. The source quotes him directly, and his words are incredibly powerful, self-pitying even. He states that his fate killed me, his childhood killed me, and the very way he was born killed me. He attributes the destruction of his potential, his capacity for happiness or feeling worthy, not to any inherent failing of his own, but entirely to the circumstances of his life, starting from his very origins, the moment of his birth. He feels sort of predetermined to unhappiness and worthlessness by forces completely outside of his control.
And this is where he brings up his mother, Lizaveta Smerdyashchaya, the source of his difficult and illegitimate birth. This seems absolutely central to his feeling of being marked by fate.
Yes, and it's presented as this central, festering grievance that has shaped his entire identity. He tells Maria about the terrible things people said, and importantly, continue to say about his mother, who was seen as mentally ill and was the subject of so much public ridicule. He specifically blames Grigory, the servant who took him in and raised him, for widely publicizing the humiliating circumstances of his birth from Lizaveta in the bathhouse. Grigory, perhaps motivated by his own moral outrage or maybe a desire for truth, essentially broadcasted Smerdyakov's illegitimacy and shameful origins to the entire community.
So he feels like everyone knows the humiliating public details of his birth and constantly uses it as a weapon to mock him. It's an inescapable source of shame for him then.
Exactly. The source says he feels this scorn and mockery is constant, pervasive, following him everywhere he goes within the neighborhood, out in the street. People make fun of him because of how he was born, because of his mother's reputation. It's not just a past event. It's a constant living source of humiliation that defines how society interacts with him. And significantly, in this raw outpouring of bitterness to Maria, he singles out her mother, Maria's landlady. He tells Maria directly that her mother was one of the worst offenders, the one who mocked his mother the most, who spread the most hurtful gossip and ridicule about Lizaveta.
What kind of cruel things did Maria's mother allegedly say about Lizaveta, according to Smerdyakov? The source provides some very specific, very harsh details here, really underscoring the meanness of the public perception.
The source gives painful, detailed examples. Maria's mother supposedly said publicly about Lizaveta that she always smelled, had a bad odor, focusing on hygiene in this really demeaning way. She mocked her physical appearance, saying her hair stood up. She relentlessly ridiculed her physical stature, saying she had no height, was only 4 feet tall, repeatedly emphasizing how tiny she was, almost like describing a freak of nature. The source makes it clear this wasn't just private commentary. It was making fun of her publicly, humiliating her openly for characteristics she couldn't control, compounding the tragedy of her mental state.
Wow, that level of public cruelty and dehumanization, it must have been incredibly painful to grow up hearing that, especially directed at his mother.
It is. And Smerdyakov tells Maria that this is the reality of his everyday life, constantly hearing these cruel things when he goes out, hearing his mother mocked for smelling, for perceived hygiene issues, for being mentally retarded or simple-minded. He poses the question directly to Maria, a rhetorical question born of his suffering. Hearing all this, experiencing this constant public ridicule of his origins and his mother, how can he possibly be expected to be happy, to be anything other than what he is?
He feels as though he was neglected, emotionally abandoned, fundamentally voided by society from the very moment he entered the world. That's powerful phrasing.
That's the powerful, almost existential phrasing used in the source, yeah. He feels like society, through its judgment and ridicule, essentially deemed him worthless from birth, due to the circumstances of his conception and his mother's condition. He explicitly questions his own responsibility in all of this. Where am I wrong? It's not just rhetorical. It's a genuine cry of pain, a plea for understanding, and a profound expression of resentment stemming from his illegitimacy and the relentless public scorn directed at him because of his mother. This lengthy, bitter explanation to Maria is intended to make her and us understand that his pervasive cynicism and negativity aren't just a mood or a choice. They are deeply rooted in traumatic childhood experiences, profound social rejection, and the constant reliving of his mother's public humiliation. It goes a long way in explaining the depth of his seemingly contradictory character, capable of creating beauty but immediately dismissing it.
After sharing these deeply painful details about his past, the source says Smerdyakov expresses not just unhappiness, but a strong, active desire to leave this place, to actually run away.
Yes, it's not just passive suffering. He has a clear, actionable ambition born out of this pain. He tells Maria he wants to go to Moscow, and he reveals a specific practical skill that could facilitate this escape. He mentions he is a good cook.
So he has a trade, something concrete he can do to make a living and pursue this dream of escaping.
He does. And his plan is to use this skill to open his own restaurant in Moscow. But the underlying motivation for this ambition is crucial and directly tied to his earlier confession. He says he wants to run away from myself. What he means by this, the source suggests, is that he wants to escape the inescapable label, the stigma that's been attached to him because of his birth from Lizaveta, the very thing people in this town constantly use to defame him and mock his mother. He simply doesn't want to stay in a place where his very existence is a source of ridicule, judgment, and a constant reminder of his painful origins.
He wants to escape his past, yes, but more specifically, the identity that has been forced upon him by his circumstances and the judgment of others. He wants a fresh start where no one knows.
Exactly. He wants to leave the physical place associated with his trauma and the constant judgment. And this desire to escape, this profound alienation from the people around him, it extends even to his view of the country itself. The source says he makes an absolutely striking, almost shocking declaration, especially for a character in a Russian novel. I don't like Russia at all.
For a Russian character in a Dostoevsky novel, no less, to say they don't like Russia, that's an incredibly strong, almost heretical statement. And he follows it up with that really provocative comment about Napoleon Bonaparte.
This is where his alienation is perhaps most starkly and controversially revealed.
Yeah.
He goes on to say that it would have been better if Napoleon Bonaparte had successfully ruled Russia.
To wish that their historical enemy had conquered them. Wow. It's extraordinary, almost unthinkable, given the national memory and pride associated with repelling Napoleon's invasion.
And this source provides exactly that historical context to underscore just how provocative this statement is within a Russian context. It reminds us that Napoleon, the great French military commander, dominated much of Europe and did indeed attempt to conquer Russia in 1812. But he was ultimately defeated, famously after capturing Moscow. Russia has historically fiercely guarded its autonomy and national identity and has this deep-seated historical resistance to being controlled or culturally dominated by any European power. Defeating Russia militarily has proven incredibly difficult throughout history. The source mentions Napoleon's initial success in taking Moscow, but notes the Russians mounted a strong comeback using tactics like guerrilla warfare, and the notoriously harsh Russian climate played a significant role in crippling his army, leading to his ultimate defeat, a pattern seen later in history as well, with Hitler. So for Smerdyakov to openly express a preference for foreign rule by their most potent historical adversary, it speaks volumes about the depth of his bitter alienation and resentment towards his own people, the very society and community that has scorned him his entire life. He hates his current situation, and the people in it so intensely, feels so rejected, that he would genuinely prefer to be ruled by a traditional enemy who is seen, perhaps in his twisted view, as more orderly or rational than the chaotic, judgmental society he inhabits. It's a powerful, almost desperate statement of his profound disconnect from the nation and culture he was born into.
He also seems to have a similarly negative view of the military as an institution, doesn't he?
Yes, the source quotes him saying he never wants to be in the army and that he wishes the entire army system would end. This sentiment is another layer to his defiance against conventional Russian values, which often hold military service, national pride, patriotism in very high regard. His rejection of these fundamental societal norms further highlights just how profoundly disconnected he feels from the community and the nation he lives in. He rejects not just the people who mock him, but the very fabric of the society that produced them. The source notes Maria is quite shocked by these radical statements, and, well, it's easy to see why. They represent a fundamental rejection of deeply held national identity and values.
After this highly charged political commentary and deeply felt expression of dissatisfaction and alienation, the source says Smerdyakov falls silent for a moment, perhaps letting the weight of his words hang in the air, and then in typical fashion, turns his criticism closer to home towards his family, specifically his brothers.
He does. He starts by saying that sometimes he feels his father, Fyodor Pavlovich, is actually right in his cynical and often cruel pronouncements about people, that the people around them can be so ignorant they almost deserve to be physically punished, even whipped. His profound frustration with the public mockery directed at him and his mother, and his general contempt for the perceived foolishness of others, clearly fuels this bitter sentiment. It makes him side in a twisted way with his father's harsh and dehumanizing views on humanity.
And then he focuses his critical gaze specifically and intensely on his brothers.
Yes, he labels all of his brothers collectively as scoundrels, lumping them together despite their individual differences. But he reserves particular venom, contempt, and harshness for Dmitri the eldest. He calls Dmitri simply a worthless person.
What are his specific complaints and criticisms against Dmitri? He seems to have a whole laundry list.
The source provides a significant list, yeah. Smerdyakov's grievances against Dmitri paint this picture of a chaotic, irresponsible, and brutish man through Smerdyakov's eyes. He lists that Dmitri fights with people constantly, threatens others with violence, is a drunkard, a gambler. He complains bitterly that Dmitri has ruined all his money, is constantly borrowing money from others and can't pay them back, has no talent for anything productive, and is simply a foolish man. He just piles on the accusations, demonstrating this profound contempt and lack of respect for Dmitri, portraying him as a destructive force.
And he also specifically brings up Dmitri's habit of challenging people to duels as another sign of his worthlessness, in his view.
The practice of dueling is a notable point of discussion in the source's analysis here. It explains that dueling was a significant, though often controversial, and increasingly frowned upon, practice in Russian society at the time, a formal, often violent way to settle disputes of honor, typically involving pistols. It was indeed considered a symbol of masculinity, courage, a willingness to defend one's honor, sometimes seen as a test of bravery. The source even mentions the tragic historical example of the famous Russian writer Alexander Pushkin, who died in a duel, highlighting the reality and seriousness of the practice in that era. Smerdyakov, though, in his cynical and dismissive view, sees Dmitri's tendency to challenge people to duels not as an act of bravery or honor, but just another example of his uselessness and recklessness. He calls it a useless talent, a bizarre skill that serves no real purpose. The source reminds us Dmitri had notoriously challenged Captain Snegiryov to a duel earlier in the story, reinforcing this pattern of volatile behavior Smerdyakov highlights.
Now, Maria, who has been listening to all this, the bitterness, the political cynicism, the family criticism, she has a very different and rather striking reaction specifically to the mention of duels, a complete contrast.
This is where we see a fascinating and really revealing contrast in perspectives between Smerdyakov and Maria. While Smerdyakov is cynical, dismissive, sees duels as useless and foolish, Maria is captivated, almost romantically fascinated by the idea. The source says she reacts with enthusiasm, calling duels a good thing, an amazing thing, and great fun. She finds the idea of two men facing off with pistols, especially over a woman, to be incredibly exciting and dramatic. She states quite directly, almost like something out of a romantic ballad, that in a duel, whoever wins gets the lady.
She even expresses a wish that she could see one, even though women typically weren't allowed to witness these duels back then.
Yes, she clearly romanticizes the whole affair. She frames it in terms of narrative and drama, calling it an adventure scene, an exciting scene, imagining how wonderful and dramatic it would be to witness such an event unfold in person. She sees the romance, the heroism, the high stakes, perhaps influenced by popular stories or idealized notions of honor from that time.
And how does Smerdryakov respond to her enthusiasm and romanticized view of dueling? He's just called it useless moments before.
Consistent with his cynical and dismissive nature, especially when confronted with sentiment he finds naive or impractical, he is immediately dismissive of her excitement. He calls her enthusiasm useless talk. He tries to inject this harsh dose of reality into her romantic fantasy, telling her quite bluntly that it's only exciting if you are the one doing the shooting, holding the pistol, not if you are the one being shot at, potentially being killed. He's very blunt, maybe even a bit cruel here, basically telling her she knows nothing about the actual reality and danger of dueling and implying she's being incredibly naive. He even tells her that if she were actually present at a real duel, faced with the danger, she would be so scared she would simply run away. So this conversation about duels and Smerdyakov's dismissive attitude towards what Maria clearly sees as an act of bravery and romance, it leads Maria to turn her questioning gaze onto Smerdyakov himself.
Ah, okay. Because he's so quick to call dueling useless and says she would run away, she starts to wonder about his courage. She maybe challenges his own bravery.
Exactly. The source notes that her initial perception of Smerdyakov, based on his intelligence and artistic talent, was that he was likely brave. But his cynical comments about duels, his dismissal of physical confrontation, and his assertion that others would flee danger make her pause and reconsider her assessment of him. She starts to suspect that perhaps he is the one who lacks courage, that he might be weak, or that he himself would run away from a fight or a dangerous situation.
So she challenges him directly with this suspicion, asking if he would run away in such a situation.
Yes, it's a pointed question, a direct challenge to his character after his dismissal of what she values as bravery. The source quotes her asking pointedly, "Would you run away? I don't expect you to run away." She's not just asking hypothetically, she's testing him, demanding to know whether he would stand and fight or flee when faced with peril. She's questioning his courage based on his words and demeanor.
And how does Smerdyakovv react to this very direct question about his own bravery, about whether he would run away? Does he defend himself? Does he get angry?
The source describes a significant and telling reaction. Smerdyakovv falls silent. He doesn't immediately respond verbally to her question. A minute or two passes, the source emphasizes, a noticeable period of silence where he offers no direct verbal reply to her challenge about his courage or whether he would run away from danger.
Instead of answering her question with words, he returns to his instrument, the guitar.
He does. After the silence, he picks up his guitar again, which he had put aside earlier, and begins playing and singing another poem he has composed. The source gives us the key lines of this new song. "Cost me what time it has, I shall get away, be merry and gay." This song, delivered through his art, is his indirect answer to Maria's challenge. He's not saying, "Yes, I am brave," or "No, I would run." Instead, he uses his creative expression to state his unwavering intention to leave this place, to escape his circumstances and the judgment that comes with them, no matter the difficulty or how long it takes. "Cost me what time it has, I shall get away." He is declaring that he will go to Moscow or somewhere else, pursue his plan to live happily, be merry and gay, maybe open his restaurant, live his life on his own terms. He adds implicitly or maybe explicitly through the context of his song that people can say whatever they want about him, including calling him cowardly, as Maria just implied. He is essentially saying he dismisses their opinion, their judgment of his character, particularly regarding courage in their terms. He will live well and be happy regardless of what they perceive as bravery or lack thereof to be.
So he doesn't engage with the challenge directly. He doesn't affirm or deny his bravery in the conventional sense Maria understands. Instead, he uses his creative outlet, his music and poetry, to declare his intention to escape and to disregard external judgment. It's a very unique and, well, revealing way of sidestepping a direct confrontation, isn't it?
It absolutely reveals a core aspect of his character, his preference for intellectual dismissal and physical escape over direct physical or emotional confrontation in the way Maria might expect or value bravery. He uses his art not for romantic expression this time, but as a shield and a statement of independence from the need to prove himself by conventional means. The source highlights this as showcasing Smerdyakovv's particular complex form of creativity in his response, using art and intellect to navigate a potentially uncomfortable truth or avoid a futile argument about physical courage. It underscores that his form of strength, or perhaps his defense mechanism, lies elsewhere entirely.
All this time, while Smerdyakovv and Maria have been having this intimate and revealing conversation discussing his painful past, his radical political views, his contempt for his family, and his complicated response to questions of courage. Alexei has been sitting nearby in the garden, listening from a distance. He heard all of that.
Yes, the source tells us Alexei had been hearing their conversation for a long time, from his vantage point on the bench before he decided the moment was right. Or maybe the conversation had reached a point where he felt he could make his presence known without interrupting something truly private. Once the conversation about bravery in Smerdyakovv's song concludes, Alexei calls out to them, and Smerdyakovv acknowledges that he hears him.
So Alexei finally approaches them after having been an unseen witness to a significant portion of their interaction. What's the first thing he asks them when he comes forward, given his urgent mission? Does he comment on what he heard?
No, he doesn't comment. Given the overriding urgency that brought him to this house in the first place, his need to find Dmitri, Alexei immediately gets straight to the point. He asks if they have seen Dmitri, explaining that he is actively looking for him, following up on his intuition and Zosima's guidance.
And Smerdyakovv's initial reaction to Alexei's direct question about Dmitri? Still dismissive.
Consistent with the frustrated and dismissive mood we've seen from him, especially when discussing his family, his reply is sharp, sarcastic, and avoids a direct answer initially. The source quotes him saying, "With clear annoyance, have I taken a contract for Dmitri?" It's a rhetorical way of expressing his irritation at being asked and stating that he is not Dmitri's keeper and isn't responsible for tracking his whereabouts. He follows this up by stating plainly that he doesn't know where Dmitri is or what he's doing, implying it's not his problem or concern.
Alexei, however, persists. He indicates that he's heard something about Dmitri relying on Smerdyakovv, specifically mentioning that Dmitri had given him instructions related to this very house.
Yes, Alexei has clearly picked up some information about Dmitri's recent activities and perhaps his movements or plans involving Smerdyakov at this location. And Smerdyakov, perhaps seeing that Alexei is aware of something, or maybe just shifting from sarcastic deflection to resentful confirmation, admits that Alexei is correct. He adds, in a characteristic display of contempt for Dmitri, yes, that's right, confirming he received instructions, and immediately refers to Dmitri as, your brother is very ill-mannered. This confirms that Dmitri has indeed been interacting with Smerdyakov and giving him orders, treating him like a subordinate. Smerdyakov then proceeds, compelled perhaps by Alexei's persistence and his own underlying resentment, to elaborate on the specific instructions Dmitri had given him concerning this house, as detailed in the source.
What exactly were these specific ill-mannered orders from Dmitri to his half-brother? What was he supposed to do?
Dmitri had ordered Smerdyakov to act as a sort of guard, a watchman, specifically at the very house they are in, the landlady's house, Maria's mother's house. His primary job was to keep a vigilant watch for Grushenka, the woman who is the central object of desire and conflict for both Dmitri and their father.
So Smerdyakov's task was basically to monitor if Grushenka came to this particular house, which was one of her known places, right?
Exactly. Smerdyakov's duty, according to Dmitri, was to observe carefully if she came to the house, and crucially, if she decided to stay the night there. If she did arrive and remain overnight, Smerdyakov's absolute primary responsibility, his urgent command, was to inform Dmitri immediately, without delay.
Why was this specific task, being an informant about Grushenka's movements at this house, so critically important and urgent to Dmitri? What was the fear?
The source clearly explains the underlying tension and conflict driving this instruction, which mirrors the larger family drama. Dmitri is passionately in love with Grushenka and desperately wants her for himself. However, their father, Fyodor Pavlovich, also desires her, and critically, the father has significant wealth and resources, while Dmitri is described as being completely broke and constantly borrowing money. Dmitri lives in constant fear that Grushenka, who is sometimes perceived as being influenced by financial security or luxury, might ultimately choose his wealthy father over him, despite his own strong feelings for her. Smerdyakov is thus positioned as a vital, albeit very reluctant, informant in this intense romantic and financial rivalry between father and son.
So Smerdyakov is meant to be Dmitri's eyes and ears at this key location, reporting on Grushenka's potential movements and presence like a servant.
Yes, Dmitri treats him exactly like a personal servant or spy, someone whose job is simply to carry out orders without question. He told Smerdyakov explicitly to sit there and keep watch at the house and to inform me as soon as Grushenka arrives. It really underscores the hierarchical and disrespectful way Dmitri views and treats his half-brother, seeing him only as a tool to be used in his own schemes.
And the source mentions that Dmitri didn't just give orders, he backed them up with a pretty serious threat to ensure Smerdyakov's compliance, didn't he?
He did. Smerdyakov tells Alexei about the severity of Dmitri's threat, highlighting the stakes involved in Dmitri's desperation and capacity for violence. Dmitri warned him that if Grushenka came to the house and stayed the night, and if Smerdyakov failed to inform him immediately, Dmitri would kill him first. This is a chilling and extremely significant threat hanging over Smerdyakov, revealing the dangerous desperation, brutality, and lack of regard for others inherent in Dmitri's pursuit of Grushenka. It immediately establishes a life-or-death situation for Smerdyakov if he doesn't comply. And Smerdyakov uses this vivid detail, the death threat, to strongly justify his reluctance to talk about Dmitri and his complaints about him. He emphasizes what a very bad man Dmitri is, using the threat as concrete proof of his dangerous nature. He references Dmitri's previous public outburst of violence and aggression, which Alexei himself witnessed earlier in the story, as further evidence. He tells Alexei not to be so naive or innocent, reminding him that he saw Dmitri's violent actions with his own eyes and should therefore understand perfectly why Smerdyakov views him with fear and deep resentment.
Maria, who is present and listening to this exchange between the half-brothers, she also confirms Smerdyakov's account of Dmitri's character and behavior. Right. She backs him up.
Yes, the source notes that Maria corroborates Smerdyakov's description of Dmitri's unpredictable and aggressive behavior. She agrees, saying, yes, Dmitri is like that, confirming that he threatens him and does this and that, validating Smerdyakov's complaints about being bothered, ordered around, and threatened by Dmitri. Her agreement adds weight to Smerdyakov's portrayal, suggesting it's not just his biased perspective.
She also confirms that Dmitri does indeed come to this old house sometimes, reinforcing its connection to him.
She does. She states that he comes here, sits here, drinks alcohol, and then leaves. But she adds an important detail that speaks to Dmitri's unpredictable nature. That they, meaning the people at the house, including her mother and Smerdyakov, never know exactly when he comes or goes, and that no one really knows his movements. He just appears and disappears unexpectedly. She also explicitly confirms that he bothers Smerdyakov, reinforcing the sense of Smerdyakov being subjected to Dmitri's demands and unpredictable presence.
So both Smerdyakov and Maria independently paint this consistent picture of Dmitri as an aggressive, unpredictable, disruptive, and even dangerous presence, especially in relation to this house and Smerdyakov's role there.
They do. Their combined testimony really strengthens Alexei's initial fear of Dmitri and underscores the volatile situation he is attempting to intervene in. Despite his initial reluctance and obvious resentment towards Dmitri, however, Smerdyakov does, finally and somewhat reluctantly, provide Alexei with a potential lead on Dmitri's whereabouts, the crucial information Alexei came seeking.
Okay, so what is this crucial piece of information that Smerdyakov gives Alexei that might finally help him find Dmitri?
He tells Alexei that earlier that morning, their brother Ivan had spoken to Smerdyakov. Ivan had specifically told Smerdyakov that he wanted to meet Dmitri at a particular restaurant located outside the main part of town in the market area.
Ah, so Ivan was also actively looking for Dmitri and trying to arrange a meeting with him that day.
Yes. Smerdyakov says that after Ivan told him this, he went to Dmitri's usual lodging place to pass on Ivan's message about the planned meeting, hoping to find Dmitri there. But Dmitri's landlord told Smerdyakov that Dmitri had already left his lodgings earlier that morning. Smerdyakov also notes, as further evidence that Ivan is likely looking for Dmitri, that Ivan himself didn't come for lunch at their father's house as expected. This suggests that Ivan is either out looking for Dmitri or has perhaps already met him at the designated restaurant. Based on this chain of events, Smerdyakov concludes for Alexei that it is most likely that Ivan and Dmitri are indeed meeting at that specific outside restaurant, and he gives Alexei the name of the place. This is the actionable information, the lead, that Alexei needed to continue his urgent search.
So it's Smerdyakov who moments before was complaining bitterly about Dmitri, describing him as worthless and expressing this deep desire to escape everyone and everything associated with his family and this town, who provides Alexei with the vital information that allows him to continue his search and potentially avert disaster. There's a powerful irony in that, isn't there?
There absolutely is. It really highlights the complex, often contradictory web of relationships, resentments, and unexpected dependencies within the Karamazov family. Even someone as alienated and resentful as Smerdyakov is still caught in the family's orbit and serves, in a strange way, as a catalyst or a source of information for the others. His knowledge, acquired through his despised role as an informant, becomes essential to Alexei's mission.
Alexei gets this crucial lead from Smerdyakov, confirms the details, and wastes no time. The source says he leaves immediately, thanking Smerdyakov and Maria for the information. He sets off towards the market area where the restaurant is located, fully intending and hoping to find both Dmitri and Ivan together there so he can speak to them both at once and try to intervene.
The source shows Alexei heading directly to the market area, focusing his steps towards the restaurant Smerdyakov named. His immediate intention is to go inside and speak with both of his brothers at once, addressing the looming family crisis head-on, just as Zosima advised.
But as he approaches the restaurant entrance, the source notes he hesitates for a moment, caught by a practical concern about his appearance, his clothes.
Yes, it's a small but telling detail. He is wearing his monastic attire, his religious robes and cap. He pauses, wondering how appropriate or, well, awkward it would be for him, a young monk, to enter a secular establishment like a public restaurant dressed that way. It's a brief moment that again highlights his position, caught between the sacred world of the monastery and the messy, everyday world of human affairs he's been sent into.
And then before he can fully resolve his hesitation or decide what to do about his attire, Ivan spots him.
That's what happens. Ivan, who, as Smerdyakov suspected, is already at the restaurant, sees Alexei standing outside near the entrance. He calls out to him from the restaurant, asking where he's going and telling him to come upstairs. Alexei tries to voice his concern about his monastic clothes again, raising the point of his appearance, but Ivan quickly dismisses his concern, telling him not to worry about it and to just come up anyway. Ivan's more worldly perspective kind of overrules Alexei's monastic self-consciousness.
And this is where the scene shifts completely, marking the transition to the next major section of the story.
The source explicitly states that at this point, the narrative perspective changes and transports us. The scene transitions, and we are shown Alexei and Ivan already sitting together at a table upstairs in the restaurant. Alexei has followed Ivan's instruction, setting aside his momentary hesitation about his clothes, and is now face-to-face with his brother.
But as you mentioned earlier, and as Smerdykov's information suggested was possible, the key person Alexei was desperately looking for, Dmitri, is not there with them. He missed him, or he wasn't there yet.
No, he's not there. Alexei's primary objective in coming to this specific location was to find Dmitri, ideally with Ivan, to address the explosive family crisis he felt was imminent. But while he found Ivan, Dmitri is notably absent from this meeting. This moment, finding just Ivan, not Dmitri, fundamentally changes the nature of the conversation that is about to take place and sets the stage for the next major interaction in the story. And the source makes a crucial point here, highlighting the extraordinary significance of what is about to unfold. It states that the conversation between Ivan and Alexei that begins from this point forward in the restaurant is widely considered the most powerful conversation in world literature. It is the famous foundational discussion that immediately precedes and leads into the incredibly renowned and philosophically dense Grand Inquisitor section of the novel, where Ivan articulates his profound challenges to faith and the nature of suffering. This encounter, initiated by Alexei's urgent search for Dmitri to prevent a physical disaster, unexpectedly leads him into a profound intellectual and spiritual confrontation with Ivan, addressing an entirely different kind of crisis altogether.
Wow. What an incredibly dense and revealing journey through just a few crucial pages of this monumental book, guided by the specific insights drawn from our source transcript. We followed Alexei wrestling with the agonizing weight of his spiritual calling versus his immediate family duty, stumbled upon the complex and deeply troubled Smerdyakov hidden away in that desolate garden, heard the painful, bitter history that has shaped his cynicism, seen the sharp contrast between his worldview and Maria's more romantic perspective, witnessed the dynamics of his subservient yet resentful relationship with Dmitri, and finally arrived, not at the hoped-for meeting with Dmitri, but at the doorstep of a truly momentous conversation between two other brothers.
This segment, as our source analysis makes so clear, it does immense work in terms of character development and setting up the central conflicts of the novel. It exposes the profound psychological toll of social stigma and illegitimacy through Smerdyakov's raw confession, laying bare the roots of his deep alienation. It showcases raw family resentments between the brothers, hinting strongly at the destructive forces of love, money, pride, their driving events. And it highlights the stark differences in character, perspective, and coping mechanisms even among living within the same tumultuous family and community. Smerdyakov's character in particular is revealed as being deeply shaped by childhood hurt and this powerful, if cynical, desire for escape and self-reinvention. It stands in stark contrast to Dmitri's volatile physical aggression and Alexei's internal spiritual and familial conflicts.
It really makes you think about the long, persistent shadow that childhood experiences, particularly those marked by societal judgment and lack of acceptance, can cast. It shapes not just someone's mood or attitude, but their entire worldview, their aspirations, their relationships, and can even lead someone to express a preference for the rule of a historical enemy over belonging to a society that has fundamentally rejected and deeply wounded them. It's a powerful illustration of the destructive nature of chronic shame and alienation.
It also raises that question of how quickly and easily we make snap judgments about people based on their background, their social standing, or their outward behavior, like cynicism or perceived worthlessness, without ever taking the time or effort to understand the deep, often hidden, painful reasons, the historical wounds and traumas that they carry within them and that profoundly shape their perspective on the world.
So here's something for you to maybe ponder based on this deep dive into Dostoevsky's characters. In a world that often encourages quick labels and easy dismissals, how can we train ourselves to look beyond surface appearances, judgments, even outward displays of bitterness or aggression to seek a deeper understanding? To try and grasp the complex, often painful underlying reasons behind someone's perspective, their struggles, and the shape of their character. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into a crucial section of the Brothers Karamazov.